Here's a poem that is pretty typical of E. E. Cummings, both in style and subject matter. Let's read it and see what we can make of it. The Cambridge ladies who live in furnished souls are unbeautiful and have comfortable minds. Also, with the Church's Protestant blessings, daughters, unscented, shapeless, spirited. They believe in Christ and Longfellow, both dead, are invariably interested in so many things. At the present writing, one still finds delighted fingers knitting for the, is it poles, perhaps? While permanent faces coyly bandy scandal of Mrs. N and Professor D, the Cambridge ladies do not care above Cambridge if sometimes in its box of sky, lavender and cornerless, the moon rattles like a fragment of angry candy. So stylistically, we can immediately see that this is not conventional. The grammar is unusual. There's only one period in the whole poem, and it comes in an unusual place. The capitalization is odd. Sometimes it occurs where we don't expect it, and other times we might expect a capital, but it's not there. And then, of course, the word order is unusual, forcing us at times to slow down, go back, and reread. And by the way, did you notice that this is a sonnet? It's extremely unconventional. But the first 8 lines do, sort of, comprise an octet, although the word perhaps spills over into line 9. And the last 6 lines sort of make up a sestet, although those lines aren't exactly a response to the first 8 in the way we normally think of a sestet. My point is that even though Cummings is often seen to be a very untraditional poet, usually, at some level, he makes some use of traditional techniques. Okay, well, having said all of that, let's look at the details. First, E. E. Cummings grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's a university town. Most notably, it is the location of Harvard University. It's an old town steeped in convention. And we know that E. E. Cummings was committed to moving beyond the conventions of thought and behavior. Now, people often associate universities with free thinking, but the social life around universities, especially old institutions like Harvard, is often pretty traditional and formal. And that's what Cummings is addressing in this poem. These Cambridge ladies live in furnished souls. That's an interesting phrase. Think of a furnished apartment. When you move in, everything is already there. It contains furniture that is of an appropriate style, placed in an appropriate location. The decor is pre-established. Somebody else has determined what it will be. Well, a furnished soul is a soul in which the ideas and feelings are inherited from others, from the community. There's no originality or free thinking involved. So they live in furnished souls, and that makes them unbeautiful, a typical Cummings-like word. And they have comfortable minds. Think about the phrase comfort zone. A comfortable mind in this context is a mind that never gets out of its comfort zone, that thinks conventional thoughts all the time and never stretches out. Now we have an interesting parenthesis. Also, with the Church's Protestant blessings, daughters, unscented, shapeless, spirited. These Cambridge ladies have daughters. They've been christened by the Church, I guess, and these daughters are as bland as the mothers. Note the 3 words used to describe the daughters: unscented, shapeless, spirited. The last one doesn't seem to fit. But that's how Cummings typically works. We think of Spirited as being feisty and independent. But think about Unscented and Shapeless as being adverbs describing Spirited. What kind of spirits do these daughters have? Unscented and shapeless ones. In other words, the daughters have bland spirits also. Remember, Cummings wants to pull us out of our conventional perceptions. Thus, he tries to use language in new ways. They believe. Now we're back to the Cambridge ladies. In Christ and Longfellow, both dead. It's interesting that Christ is associated with Longfellow, who was a very popular poet in the early and mid-19th century, but whose style went thoroughly out of fashion. By the time Cummings came along, Longfellow was considered very old-fashioned and poetically irrelevant. Because Cummings links him with Christ, the suggestion is that Christ is also irrelevant. But that's what the Cambridge ladies hang on to, irrelevant ways of thinking. They're invariably interested in so many things. So what are these Cambridge ladies interested in? At the present writing, one still finds delighted fingers, knitting for the, is it poles, perhaps? The fingers are delighted because the ladies think they're doing a lot of good. They are knitting sweaters or socks for unfortunate people a long way away. Mainly, they aren't even sure who they're knitting for. Perhaps the Poles. I don't mean to be political here, but we Americans can be prone to that. We sometimes do things for others to make our consciences feel good without giving a lot of thought to whether we're actually doing any good or not. We want to assuage our consciences without inconveniencing ourselves. I once knew a woman who ran a soup kitchen in Erie. She said her most difficult days were Thanksgiving and Christmas because so many comfortable, middle-class people wanted to volunteer for an hour to serve meals to the homeless that they couldn't accommodate them all. But all the other days of the year, they were struggling to get enough help. That's the idea that Cummings is getting at here. So as they're knitting, what else interests them? While permanent faces coyly bandy scandal of Mrs. N and Professor D. The Cambridge ladies are interested in the latest gossip. Which professor is seeing which lady in the community? The word coyly means sort of modestly, at least on the surface. The word bandy literally means to toss back and forth. So these ladies toss back and forth gossipy tidbits about their neighbors. As we can see, they are mostly characterized by small-mindedness. So we know what they care about. What don't they care about? The Cambridge ladies do not care above Cambridge if sometimes in its box of sky lavender and cornerless the moon rattles like a fragment of angry candy. Well, now this is E.E. Cummings, so we don't want to get too literal about this. We have to stretch our minds a little and think metaphorically. If the whole sky shook, if the order of the universe was turned upside down, these Cambridge ladies wouldn't be interested. They're too focused on little, insignificant things. This poem, by the way, was written in the early 20s, shortly after Cummings returned from Europe and imprisonment in the First World War. In his mind, the order of the universe had indeed been turned upside down, and the quiet traditions that went on uninterrupted in Cambridge social life distressed him. This is a poem about small-mindedness. The Cambridge ladies represent small-mindedness, and to a degree they represent how Cummings feels about middle-class American culture.